This mini lecture is going to focus on the different branches of Judaism. If you scroll down the page a little bit, you will find a very nice video that gives you a very clear history of the development of the main three branches of contemporary Judaism. That would be Orthodox, Reform, and Conservative. It doesn't talk about these, but Reconstructionist, Humanistic, and Messianic Judaism are more recent developments, but we can really see them all as being part of that trend where as we get into the modern era, many Jews have not felt that the kinds of halachic restrictions, halacha are the very strict rules that the Orthodox live by, governing what kind of food they can eat. Obviously, people don't eat pork, they don't mix milk and meat, and all of those kinds of things. But also the prayers that they say over not only food, but when they wake up, when they go to sleep, three major prayers they do every day. There's actually prayers throughout the day in Orthodox Judaism. And other Jews felt that they just that the heart of being Jewish really wasn't about all of those rules, and that they were really preventing them from living in a modern secular world. And so to varying extents, these other branches of Judaism have relaxed those rules. So the video is going to give you some details about that. What I want to say is that the central message that I think really unites these different traditions is what we talked about in the last set of lectures, which were looking at the idea of tikkun olam at the beginning of the last web page. Tikkun olam, putting the world back together, that God had a blueprint for the world, and it was supposed to be this perfect place, and yet it wasn't. The divine light was too much and shattered the divine orbs that represent the structure, the blueprint of the world, and therefore the task of the Jewish people, according to this idea, is to somehow fulfill God's promise, to make the world what it ought to be, what God wants it to be. And in some way, you could say all of these different groups are doing that just from their own perspective. If we look at the Orthodox believe that by maintaining these very strict rules of conduct, theoretically they should be moral, though one can certainly argue that morality can take a back seat to the formal requirements. But they believe that it is precisely by living in accordance with these laws, the divine laws that God prescribed, that say, that this is how to be holy, and that the covenant, as they understand it, the Orthodox, the covenant requires Jews to adhere to this holy standard that God set. And the idea is that when the Jewish people succeed at that to some high degree, that's precisely when the world will be ushered into a new and more perfect era, when the Messiah will come. And so in that sense, they are doing what they think is required to tikkun olam, to fix the world. If we look at the Reform or Conservative or the other movements, they're simply interpreting that in more secular, more liberal ways. They're moving away from the strict halachic requirements of these are the rules that govern how you eat, how you dress, how you pray, how you live every moment of your life. And to varying extents, they say those things are less important than at the heart of this is the being a moral person. That for, say, a humanistic Jew, a Jewish person who does not believe in God, but believes that the Jewish tradition over millennia has developed these sort of moral ideas about what it means to be a human being and how we ought to treat each other, and that one can deeply appreciate those ideas. And in fact, culturally you grow up and these are the rituals that you do, bar mitzvahs, bat mitzvahs, different holidays that you celebrate. You can appreciate the value of all of those rituals and holidays, etc., without having to believe that God is behind them. So in some sense you could say that humanistic Jewish tradition, people who strongly identify with being Jewish without believing in God, and maybe not even going to synagogue or engaging in any explicit ritual behavior, that they're still adhering to this basic idea that by being good human beings, by taking the messages that we find in the tradition and applying them to your life, deciding to be a doctor and going around the world and helping people in places that are suffering from war and hunger, etc., that by doing those kinds of things, you are also participating in this ideal of tikkun olam. So the video will say a little bit more about the basic stuff, but the gist of it is the Orthodox adhere most strictly. The Reform relaxed the rules a lot. And again, belief in God, not necessarily the most important thing. Behavior and adherence to ritual and custom more important. The conservative sort of pulled that a little bit back more towards the observant end. Maybe you should keep kosher, maybe you shouldn't do work on the Sabbath, but without making that strict requirements. And so conservative Jews are probably more likely than Reform to keep kosher, but they may keep kosher on their own, in their own way. They may keep kosher at home, but not if they go to a restaurant, or they may not keep strictly kosher even at home, but have certain things that they don't do. For example, my cousin who doesn't believe in God, and yet he doesn't eat pork. And that's kind of his nod, his way of accepting an element of his tradition. It helps him to feel that he's participating in a Jewish tradition, even though he doesn't believe that not eating pork has anything to do with God wanting him to do this or that, or that it will have any kind of practical consequence on his life or the life of the world. It's just one way that he chooses to connect with the Jewish tradition. So that's a way that those rules can be relaxed. Reconstructionist tradition is quite interesting, established by Rabbi Kaplan, who probably did not believe in God himself, all signs indicate, but felt that the Jewish tradition had continually reconstructed itself to change to different times, and that he was just doing that in the modern era, and that the important elements are bringing community together and making the world a better place, this tikkun olam ideal. And therefore, that's the Reconstructionist tradition rewrote parts of the sacred texts to remove references to, say, gender inequality or ideas that the Jewish people might somehow be more chosen than other people, those kinds of things. He felt free to change those, to reconstruct the tradition. I talked about humanistic Judaism. The last one would be Messianic Judaism. These are either Jewish people who have come to Christianity in some sense, that they believe that Jesus is the Messiah and it's through Jesus Christ that we'll be saved. And so they're Messianic, they believe the Messiah has come and that is Jesus. The other group that might be there are people that come from the Christian side who believe that Jesus abided by all of the Jewish laws and teachings, and therefore they should as well. And so there's various different forms of Messianic Judaism, and it's hard to generalize, but it's some kind of mix between Jews who have moved towards Christianity and Christians who have moved towards Jews. Okay, well, I hope that you find that helpful information and choose to answer the question at the bottom of the page, and we'll hopefully talk about it more in class.